bragging. He told everyone that Evan was the only real success in the family, the pride of the Valles. Meanwhile, they told people I had failed, that I couldn't handle military life, that I quit. I sat in the back, listening to whispers, smiling like it didn't cut straight through me, but then, Evan's wing commander looked across the room, locked eyes with me, and said, "Ma'am. A fighter squadron leader." The entire room fell silent. My father's face froze. That moment changed everything. My name is Aria Vale. I'm 29, and I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house where the walls were covered with medals, photos of aircraft, and framed certificates of valor. My father, Richard, is a retired Marine Corps officer who believed the only definition of success was loud, public, and uniformed. My mother, Helen, is warm but so determined to keep peace that she never challenged my father's harsh words. My brother, Evan, is 2 years younger than me and has always been the golden child. He's charming, confident, and loved the attention that came with wearing a uniform. Even as a kid, when we were children, I followed the rules. I studied late into the night, joined track, volunteered at the base hospital. But no matter what I achieved, Evan always got the praise. The first time he wore a junior ROTC uniform at 16, my father took him out for steak dinner and called him the future of this family. Meanwhile, my awards gathered dust on the kitchen counter. In college, I chose aerospace engineering. Quiet, focused work. My father told me it was a waste of my potential, because I wasn't in the ROTC parade line, shouting chants on the field. I graduated top of my class but never heard a single "I'm proud of you" from him. After college, I joined the Air Force. But I didn't post about it, didn't hold big send-off parties. I deployed overseas, worked long nights under harsh desert skies, earned my flight wings, and eventually became one of the youngest female fighter squadron leaders. But I didn't say a word to my family. I thought keeping it quiet would keep the peace. I thought maybe if I let Evan shine, maybe my father would be happy. At family gatherings, my father called me a civilian at heart, joked about me being a soft academic. Evan laughed, sometimes even ruffled my hair like I was a little girl playing dress-up. Grandpa Joe, my father's father, a Korean War veteran, always watched me differently. When my father talked over me, Grandpa Joe would slip me a quiet nod or rest a hand on my shoulder at dinner. He never called me a failure. He never called me soft. But he never said anything out loud either. Last summer, Evan called to tell me about his commissioning ceremony. My mother texted, "Please come." It would mean a lot to him. I booked a flight home, sat in the last row of the plane, staring out the window at the sunrise above the clouds, wondering if I was making a mistake by showing up. When I arrived at the base, I watched Evan walk confidently, surrounded by friends and officers. My father's chest swelled with pride, introducing him to every person who passed. My mother hovered close, nervous but glowing with relief. It was supposed to be Evan's day, but before the ceremony even started, my father had already told 3 guests that I couldn't hack it in uniform. One woman actually patted my arm, saying, "Don't worry honey, military life isn't for everyone." I forced a polite smile, swallowed the heat burning in my throat, and took my seat in the back row. I didn't want to embarrass my brother. I didn't want to start an argument. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, I could slip out after the ceremony and catch a cab without having to face another humiliating comment, but deep inside, I felt a storm building. Years of being overlooked, years of being labeled weak, years of knowing I had proven myself again and again, all of it churned under my ribs. As I sat there, watching my brother stand tall in his pressed blue uniform, I had no idea that in a few minutes, everything my family believed about me would collapse in a single moment. The ceremony hall smelled like polished wood and coffee. Rows of crisp uniforms and proud families packed the seats. Evan stood near the stage, shaking hands, his face shining with excitement. My father moved through the crowd like a general on parade, his voice booming as he repeated the same story. To anyone who would listen, Evan is finally bringing honor to this family. Arya? She's just trying to figure life out. I sat in the back, my dress uniform jacket folded neatly over my lap, my hands gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every few minutes, someone would glance at me and then look away with that pitying half-smile. One woman even leaned down and whispered, "You must be so proud of your brother. You know, maybe you'll find your path one day too." I nodded politely, feeling a sharp sting deep in my chest. My throat felt tight, but I kept breathing evenly, trying not to let the anger show on my face. My mother kept turning around to check if I was still there, her eyes pleading with me not to cause a scene. My father didn't even acknowledge me then. The photo request started. A young officer called out, "Vale family, come up here." My father jumped at the chance. He grabbed Evan and my mother, then turned to Grandpa Joe and waved him over. I stayed seated. My father's voice carried across the hall. "Arya, you can sit this one out." Let's keep it to the uniformed folks. My stomach twisted. Grandpa Joe turned to look at me, his eyes soft and full of something I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Pride, hidden beneath decades of strict military discipline. A few people in the crowd started whispering. I heard one man say, "Isn't she the one who couldn't finish officer training?" Another answered, "Yeah, she dropped out or something. Too tough for her, I guess." Every word felt like a slap. I thought about all the nights I slept in a tent overseas, waking to the sound of aircraft engines roaring overhead, the endless hours spent planning missions, the moments I stood in front of a squadron of young pilots who looked to me for guidance and protection. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the constant weight of leadership, but to them, I was nothing more than the failed daughter. As they took photos, I stayed seated, my nails digging into my palms. My mind spiraled. I wanted to stand up and scream. Tell them about the missions, the coins and commendations, the respect I had earned from people who knew the real me. But then I saw Evan's face, bright and joyful, so sure of his place in the world. I didn't want to ruin that for him. After the photos, Evan walked over, his eyes sparkling. He sat down next to me and gave me a playful nudge. "Hey, you good back here in the cheap seats?" He grinned like he was making a harmless joke, but I felt the weight of every time he'd laughed at me, every time he'd called me his big sister who never quite found her lane. I forced a small smile. "Congratulations, Evan. You look sharp." He tilted his head. "You know, Dad's just trying to push you to be better. He doesn't mean to make you feel small." I wanted to tell him how wrong he was. I wanted to tell him that his words were as sharp as our father's. But instead, I looked at my hands and stayed silent. When the ceremony started, I stood when asked, recited the pledge, clapped in all the right places. My father sat straight and proud, his eyes fixed on Evan, who now looked like the perfect soldier in his pressed blue uniform. During the speeches, I noticed my father whispering to a colonel next to him, gesturing toward me. The colonel looked back, raised his eyebrows, and nodded slowly. It was a humiliating moment. My own father couldn't resist turning me into a punchline even in a room full of strangers. I felt a sharp pain behind my ribs. Every memory of early mornings on the flight line, every drop of sweat in the gym, every mission brief flashed across my mind like a silent film. I realized in that moment how deeply my family's narrative had sunk into everyone's minds. That I was weak, a dropout, a disappointment. Grandpa Joe caught my eye from across the row. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just held my gaze, steady and unwavering. In that stare, I felt the unspoken challenge. I took a deep breath and straightened my back. I felt the weight of my father's words crashing over me, but for the first time, I didn't let it drown me. My father wanted me to be silent. My brother wanted me to stay invisible. Even my mother wanted me to keep the peace. But there was something shifting inside me, a quiet surge of resolve rising to the surface. I didn't know what would happen next. But as I sat there, breathing slowly and holding Grandpa Joe's gaze, I felt a power I hadn't let myself feel in years, and in that moment, I knew I was done hiding. The moment the ceremony ended, a soft hum of chatter filled the hall. Families moved forward to take photos with their newly commissioned officers, hugs and laughter echoing under the high ceiling. My father beamed, shaking hands, his arm locked around Evan's shoulders like he had just secured a championship trophy. I stood quietly off to the side, pretending to look at my phone. My mother hovered nearby, torn between wanting me close and not wanting to upset my father's perfect narrative. Grandpa Joe lingered by the stage steps, watching me closely, his sharp eyes reading every tiny movement in my body. As the crowd shifted, a hush rolled through the room. A tall man in full dress uniform walked in, Colonel Maddox, Evan's wing commander. His presence alone straightened spines and snapped conversations to a halt. My father's eyes lit up. He nudged Evan forward. "Colonel Maddox." "Sir, what an honor," my father said, shaking his hand with both of his. "This is my son, Evan Vale. Our star. Our pride." Colonel Maddox returned the handshake politely but didn't immediately look at Evan. His eyes scanned the room methodically, pausing on each face as if searching for something. Then, he stopped. His gaze locked directly onto me. A ripple of confusion spread through the small crowd gathered around my family. My father turned to see where the colonel was looking, his smile freezing mid-motion. Evan's brow creased, glancing back at me like he had suddenly remembered I was there at all. Colonel Maddox's voice rang out, strong and clear. "Ma'am, Arya Vale?" The words cut through the room like a blade. My heart slammed into my ribs. My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide and fearful. I felt every cell in my body spark awake. This was the moment. I had spent years burying my accomplishments, hiding to keep the peace, telling myself my family's approval wasn't worth the fight. But the truth was, I had always longed for them to see me. Not the version they made up, not the quiet shadow. In the background, my father quickly recovered and stepped forward, flustered. "Oh, sir, that's just my daughter." She, never really finished. Colonel Maddox didn't even glance at him. His sharp blue eyes stayed on me. "Where's your commander coin, Captain Vale?" Silence swallowed the room. It was as if the air had been sucked out. I felt my fingers twitch against the inside of my palm, the familiar edge of the silver. Commander coin hidden in my pocket. I stood still, my mind replaying every moment I had let myself shrink to make them comfortable. Every moment I swallowed my voice. Every mission where I stood in front of a squadron of pilots and carried their fears on my shoulders. I reached into my pocket. My fingers curled around the coin, the cold metal grounding me. I pulled it out slowly, raising it just high enough for everyone to see. Colonel Maddox nodded, a faint proud smile tugging at his usually rigid expression. "Captain Arya Vale. One of our finest squadron leaders overseas. Her leadership saved lives more times than we can count." A few officers nearby audibly gasped. A young woman in uniform standing near the stage clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with awe. I saw Evan's face fall slack, confusion and disbelief crashing over him in waves. My father looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He tried to speak but no words formed. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward slightly but stopped, her hand still hovering near her mouth. I held the coin tightly, my hand steady. I met Colonel Maddox's gaze and nodded once. He turned to the crowd. "We talk about courage and leadership, but we often forget the quiet leaders. The ones who don't need a spotlight to prove their worth. Captain Vale embodies that strength. Today isn't just a day to celebrate new officers like Lieutenant Vale, but also to honor those who continue to lead with integrity and sacrifice." Applause started hesitantly, then grew, rolling through the hall like a rising tide. My face felt hot, my heartbeat thundered in my ears, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. Evan stepped toward me, his voice trembling. "Arya, you're a captain? A squadron leader? Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Because no one ever asked. Grandpa Joe stepped forward then, his cane clicking against the floor. He stood in front of me, his eyes wet, his shoulders trembling. "I knew it. I knew it all along," he said, his voice cracking as he pulled me into AHUG.in. That moment, it didn't matter that my father's face had gone pale or that my mother's tears kept falling. It didn't matter that the guests looked at me with wide, stunned eyes. I had chosen to stand up. I had chosen to claim my story. I slipped the coin back into my pocket, feeling a weight lift from my chest. The moment I had feared for so long had finally come, and instead of breaking me, it made me feel more alive than ever. The applause kept growing until it filled every inch of that hall, echoing off the polished walls and shaking the air around me. In all the years I had spent trying to disappear, I had never imagined that the moment I finally stood up would feel like this, not heavy or humiliating, but like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. Colonel Maddox raised his hand slightly, quieting the room. His voice was warm but commanding as he turned toward the crowd. "I've served with many fine officers, but Captain Vale stands apart. She led combat missions in conditions that would break most people. She protected not just her pilots, but entire ground crews and civilians. You don't hear her story because she doesn't seek credit. But make no mistake, she is exactly the kind of leader we need." I felt eyes on me from every direction, but instead of shame, I felt a fierce, electric pride surge through my body. This was the truth I had buried under years of forced smiles and polite silence. I looked toward my father. He stood frozen, staring at me as though he were seeing a ghost. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I saw his carefully built image of me crumble right there in front of everyone. The man who had always believed leadership meant being the loudest voice in the room now stood speechless, completely stripped of his control. Evan turned fully toward me, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and the colonel. "Arya, why? Didn't you ever tell me?" "I didn't know," his voice cracked. The same confident brother who once teased me for not being tough enough now looked like a lost kid, holding onto an idea of me that was gone forever. I took a slow breath. My voice felt stronger than it ever had. "I didn't tell you. Because I didn't need to prove anything. I wasn't looking for applause. I was doing my job." The words hit him hard. His shoulders dropped, and he looked at the floor, shame and realization washing over him in one heavy wave. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she reached for me. "Arya, I didn't know how alone you felt. I should have asked more. I'm so sorry." I looked into her eyes. I saw regret, love, and a kind of helplessness that finally felt honest instead of hidden behind polite dinners and forced smiles. I nodded once, a silent acceptance, but I didn't reach for her hand. Not yet. Grandpa Joe was the first to move. He stepped right up to me and placed a hand firmly on my shoulder. His eyes shimmered with pride. I told your grandmother once that you had more fight in you than any of us. You just had a different way of showing it. I've never been prouder. I felt tears gather in my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want them to blur this moment. Colonel Maddox turned back to Evan and clapped a strong hand on his shoulder. Lieutenant Vale, you have every reason to be proud today. But always remember, leadership isn't about medals or loud speeches. It's about quiet courage and the sacrifices no one sees. Evan nodded weakly, his face pale. He turned back to me and whispered, I need to be better. You're the example, not me. I nodded, my throat tight. Start by listening. By really seeing the people around you. As the room slowly began to move again, a few junior officers approached me, asking for photos and thanking me for my service. A young woman with a new cadet badge on her uniform stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ma'am, I didn't know there were female squadron leaders like you. You make me believe I can do this too. I felt something shift inside me, years of hiding and dismissing my worth dissolved in that moment. I placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. You can. And you will. Don't let anyone write your story for you. My father stood off to the side, alone, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if holding himself together by force. For a split second, he met my eyes. He looked like a man realizing he had built his world on the wrong foundation. There was pain there, but also a flicker of understanding. For the first time in my life, I didn't need his approval. I didn't need to shrink myself to keep him comfortable. I stood in my uniform, my commander coin warm in my pocket, the weight of my truth finally resting where it belonged, in the open, undeniable and whole. As I turned toward the exit with Grandpa Joe by my side, a wave of relief and pride rolled over me. I didn't look back to see if my father followed or if Evan tried to call after me. For once, I wasn't walking away in silence. I was walking forward, head high, finally free of the invisible chains I had carried for so long. In that hall, surrounded by clapping strangers and the shocked faces of my own family, I had reclaimed my story. And I knew, without a single doubt, I would never let it go again. The ride home from the base felt different. The tension that used to sit heavy in my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter, a quiet certainty I had never allowed myself to feel before. Grandpa Joe sat beside me in the car, his old, strong hand resting gently on top of mine. Every so often, he would glance over and nod as if confirming to himself that I was real, that the granddaughter he always believed in had finally stepped into the light. I could still hear the echo of Colonel Maddox's words in my mind. For so long, I had convinced myself that if I stayed silent, I could keep the peace, keep my family together. But the truth was, the silence had only protected their illusions, not me. When we got back to the house, my mother was waiting at the door. Her face was puffy from crying, and she looked at me with a mix of fear and relief. She stepped forward slowly, like approaching a fragile animal. Arya, can we talk? For a moment, I almost turned away. Old habits tugged at me to shut down, to avoid conflict, to slip away to my old room and disappear. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I took a breath and nodded. We sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where I used to do my homework while my father lectured Evan on how to carry the Vale name with pride. My mother reached for my hand but paused, unsure. Her voice trembled. I should have asked you. I should have seen you. I'm sorry for letting him make you feel like you didn't belong. I looked at her for a long moment. I saw the years of fear in her eyes, the countless times she had chosen to keep quiet to keep my father calm. I understood it, but I wouldn't let it define me anymore. I needed you to stand up for me, I said softly, my voice steady. But I also understand why you couldn't. I'm not angry anymore. But I won't go back to being invisible. She finally broke down. Her head dropped into her hands, and she wept openly, the way I imagined she had wanted to for years. I reached across the table and took her hand, not to comfort her completely, but to show her that I wasn't holding on to hate. Later that evening, Evan knocked on my door. He stepped inside hesitantly, holding a mug of tea like he needed something to do with his hands. He looked smaller without his uniform, stripped of the confidence that had always wrapped around him like armor. Arya, he started, his voice low. I didn't know how much I was hurting you. I thought I was the one carrying the family legacy. I never even thought to ask about your life. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. But you have to understand, you were never meant to carry it alone. You just listened to the version of the story Dad wanted. He lowered his eyes, shame flooding his face. I want to be better. I want to learn who you really are. If you'll let me. For the first time, I saw him not as my rival or the golden boy, but as my brother, flawed, lost, trying to find his way, just like I had. I reached for his hand. Then start listening. Start asking. And don't shrink from the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. We sat there for a while, no more words needed. In that silence, we started to rebuild something real. Later that night, I found Grandpa Joe on the back porch. He was looking up at the stars, his cane leaning against the railing. He didn't turn when I joined him, told you they'd see you. One day, he said quietly, a hint of a smile in his voice. I leaned against the railing next to him, breathing in the cool night air. Thank you for always believing in me, even when you didn't say it out loud. He turned to me then, his eyes soft and wet. You didn't need me to say it. You were always strong enough to stand on your own. I just hoped one day you'd remember it. For a long time, we stood together in silence, 2 generations bound by a quiet kind of strength, looking up at a sky that felt wide and limitless. I realized then that I had spent my whole life waiting for permission to be seen. That day at the base, I finally gave myself that permission. I stopped asking for approval from people too afraid to understand me. I stopped shrinking to fit their narrow definitions. People will call you a failure when they don't understand your journey. They'll label you weak when they can't measure your strength in the only ways they know. But true strength isn't about proving them wrong, it's about standing so firmly in your truth that their words lose all power. In the end, I didn't need my father's praise or the family's approval. I needed my own respect. And as I stood there under the stars, with Grandpa Joe beside me and my heart finally steady, I knew one thing for certain, I had never failed. I had just been waiting for the right moment to rise. And now, I wasn't going to sit quietly ever again.